and welcome to my channel. Today's story takes place in various areas in Pierce County, Washington. Tacoma is located in Pierce County, and all of the areas in this story are considered suburbs of Tacoma. Pierce County is home to Mount Rainier and Mount Rainier National Park. This story is about four women whose murders are tied to a man who is being considered a serial killer. Our first victim was 17-year-old Denise Sallee, who was referred to as Denny, so that is what I will call her. Denny had spent the last 2 years with her grandparents in Kodiak, Alaska, and had just returned home to Washington in the fall of 1985. She was a straight-A student in Alaska, but when she returned home, the curriculum was a little different and she quit school. She got a job at a fast food restaurant and also babysat. Since she had been away for 2 years, she really didn't have any close friends. She ran into a girl she had known before she left, and the two would hang out together. Friday, January 24th, 1986. Around 6 p.m., Denny left her house with her friend, and they went to Paradise Bowling Alley in nearby Parkland. It was a popular hangout for teenagers and a great place to meet people. The friend wanted to leave the bowling alley, but Denny wanted to stay. She was last seen hanging around a guy named Tim. Saturday, January 25th, 1986. Denny hadn't returned home, but her mother assumed she had stayed with her friend. She knew her daughter liked to party, and a lot of times she would call around midnight and say, "I'm staying here or there." When Denny's employer called to say Denny hadn't shown up for work, that's when her mother became concerned and called the police. The police considered her a runaway and told her to check with the local hospitals, and if she still doesn't return, to call back in a couple days. Denny's mom called around and had 100 posters printed up that she took to the businesses along Pacific Avenue near the bowling alley. 3 days later, on Monday, January 28th, Denny's mother called the police again, and they basically handed her over to a department social worker. The police said they received 90 to 100 calls a month for runaways, so they didn't really treat Denny as a missing person. The only person searching for Denny was her mother. She was certain her daughter didn't run away because Denny had just paid to have her car along with some of her possessions shipped from Alaska. March 29, 1986. A 7-year-old boy named Jeremy was looking for bottles and cans in the woods behind his home. He would turn the bottles in to get money. The woods were a popular spot for teenagers to party, and Jeremy's father told him he had heard a party the night before. So Jeremy set out to find bottles and cans. Instead, he found a female's nude body. He sprinted back up to the house and called the police. The following day, March 30th, the badly decomposed body was believed to be Denise Sallee, based on jewelry that was found on her body and clothing that was found nearby. Later, dental records confirmed it was Denise Sallee. It had been 2 months since Denny was last seen at the Paradise Bowling Alley. The bowling alley was on busy Pacific Avenue, which was lined with businesses. The boys' home was on the other side of the block from Pacific Avenue. There was a wooded area that separated the backyards of the homes on A Street and the business parking lots on Pacific Avenue. Teens would access those woods via the parking lots behind the businesses and party in the woods. You may wonder why, if teens were back there partying the night before, why they didn't smell a body that had been lying there for 2 months. I wondered that too, but those woods are thick and they stretch a long distance behind the homes on A Street and the businesses on Pacific Avenue, so the partying teens could have been further down. Denny's body was found a quarter-mile away from the bowling alley. Now I have to go back to March 26th, 3 days before Denny's body was discovered. A Pacific Avenue business owner found some women's clothing when he was cleaning out his parking lot. He scooped them up to take them home to wash and give them to his daughter. Gee, thanks, Dad. That's not gross at all. After the article in the paper ran, about the boy finding the body, the man turned the clothing over to the police, and they were confirmed to belong to Denny. Those were the clothes that were used to help in her identification. Police returned to the parking lot and found Denny's blouse stuffed under a log. This is when police finally gave Denny's case attention. During this time in the 80s, police in Tacoma and Seattle and surrounding areas had formed a Green River Killer Task Force. Those murders were also happening during this time and hadn't been solved yet. Police were trying to determine if Denny's murder could be related to those murders. By April 7th, they did not believe they were related. The police did not release details regarding how Denny was murdered, only that it was violent. April 9, 1986, the police released a sketch and description of the man Denny was seen leaving the bowling alley with. The man was described as being approximately 5'10", medium build, light brown hair, light eyes, and a light mustache. He was believed to be driving a blue 1969 Chevy Camaro. October 6, 1986, just before 6 p.m., 3 young boys playing in a gravel pit found a nude body of a woman. They ran to a nearby neighbor's house to report what they saw. A man who lived at the house went to the area and found a young woman lying on a slope, but there didn't appear to be blood around the body. Police believe the body had been dumped there recently because that area was heavily traveled by kids and motorcycle riders. The girl's identity was not learned until 6 days later when the girl's father identified her as 16-year-old Kimberly Payne. Kimberly was one of 8 children, but was a frequent runaway and was living in a foster home at the time. She was last seen at the foster home on September 30th, 1986, and was reported to the police as a runaway, which we have already learned from Denny's case. Runaways didn't get investigated as missing persons. According to a witness who came forward after the news came out, she had last seen Kimberly, guess where? The Paradise Bowling Alley. She said she saw Kimberly on October 5th. When shown a picture of Kimberly lying in the morgue, she couldn't say for sure if it was Kimberly. My guess is her face must have not been recognizable because her father identified her by scars and a birthmark. Dental records on file from when she was a child couldn't be used. Cause of death was not released but described as homicidal violence. Investigators also did not believe her murder was related to the Green River murders. Kimberly's date of death is listed as October 4th, but she was seen at a bus stop on October 5th, visited a friend's house, and was seen at the bowling alley also on the 5th. It wouldn't be until January of 1987 until more details were released regarding the last time Kimberly was seen. She was seen leaving the bowling alley with a man who police did not consider a suspect but wanted for questioning. He was described as about 6 foot tall, thin but muscular build, blue eyes, a short black beard and mustache, and a scar on his left cheek that looked to be from a recent injury. Years went by and both girls were mentioned sporadically along with other unsolved murders. January 24th, 1996, the 10th anniversary of the last time Denise Sallee was seen alive, the papers ran an article. The boy who found her body was now 17, the same age as Denny when she was murdered. He recalled finding her body and that he had trouble with it afterwards but has overcome those feelings. Both the boy and Denny's mother were featured in this article, and both expressed wanting this case solved. June 13, 2001, 72-year-old Kathryn Coates was found dead outside her Tacoma home. Her husband found her lying in some bushes in the backyard. Police believe she interrupted a burglary in progress. She had been beaten, strangled, and stabbed. The wires on the house alarm had been cut, and a box containing valuables was found as if someone packed them up to steal them. The Coates' home had been a target for burglary twice in recent years, as well as other homes in the area. June 17, 2001. 4 days after Kathryn's murder, a sketch of a man seen in the area by neighbors was released. He was described as 5'10", medium build, wearing a black t-shirt and brown boots. June 27, 2001. 48-year-old Rebecca Nash was found strangled in her Tacoma apartment by a friend who went to check on her because she hadn't heard from Rebecca in several days. The apartment door was unlocked, and Rebecca was known to lock her windows and doors and not answer the door to strangers. However, there were no signs of forced entry. Items from her apartment were missing, and so was her car. Police released a description of Rebecca's Chevy Cavalier and license plate number. June 28, 2001. The day after her murder, Rebecca's car was found by a security guard at an apartment complex about a mile away. July 3, 2001. Police released the name and photo of the main suspect in Kathryn Coates' murder. His name was Timothy Burkhart. Later that same day, a relative of a person who had been out of town for a month came to check on the relative's apartment and discovered a dead body. Police were called, and the body was identified as Timothy Burkhart. It was an apartment complex Timothy had worked in several years ago. It was also the complex where Rebecca Nash's car had been found 5 days earlier. It was determined Timothy had been dead for at least a day, which put his date of death at July 2nd. His death was an intentional overdose. He left a note, but the contents were not revealed. July 6, 2001, police released information to the public stating that they searched a storage locker that belonged to Timothy and found several items that belonged to both Rebecca Nash and the Coates home. They also found bloody clothing belonging to Timothy. It was revealed Timothy had pawned one of Kathryn's rings. Apparently, after the sketch was released on June 17th, after Kathryn Coates was murdered, a relative of Timothy's called the police to say it looked like him and they knew he had been in the Coates neighborhood that day. The problem was Timothy had no known address, and a search of his prior residences failed to locate him. That is how he remained free to rob and murder Rebecca Nash. Police sent the bloody clothing found in Timothy's storage unit for testing to determine if the blood belonged to Kathryn Coates. August 6, 2001, tests confirmed the blood on Timothy's clothing matched Kathryn Coates. Since Timothy was dead, he couldn't be charged. Police closed the cases on both Kathryn Coates and Rebecca Nash's murders, confirming Timothy Burkhart was responsible for their deaths. April 2009, police developed a cold case room in police headquarters. The cold case team started compiling evidence from unsolved murders. When detectives started reviewing the cases of Denise and Kimberly, a name kept popping up: Tim. They compared the sketches in Denise, Kimberly's, and Kathryn's cases and thought they looked similar. It was said that Timothy Burkhart hung out with the same group of friends as Kimberly and liked to party at the gravel pits, and in Denny's case, she was last seen with a man named Tim. Cold case detectives started digging hard into Timothy's background and found he had a long history of committing burglaries. They had to search through multiple databases to see if they could find any information on him. They determined his DNA had never been entered into a database, and he had been cremated, so there was no chance of extracting it from him. His bloody clothing was still in evidence. They decided to submit the clothing for testing to see if they could extract any of his DNA. That worked. They were able to build a genetic profile in the database. They ran it through the database to see if it matched of any other unsolved murders, and it returned no results. They decided to have items found in Kimberly Payne's murder tested, but they needed to apply for a grant to fund the DNA testing. They were able to get funding in late 2009 or early 2010. July 21st, 2010. The DNA submitted from Kimberly Payne's case came back as matching Timothy Burkhart's DNA. They had nothing to submit for testing for Denise Sallee because the man who found her clothing took them home and washed them. Apparently, there wasn't anything on the blouse found under the log they could use. However, police have named him as her murderer based on other evidence. One thing that bothered the police was if this man was a potential serial killer, how was it that he went dormant between 1986 and 2001? He had spent some time in jail for burglaries, but not an extensive amount of time. He didn't appear to have left the state of Washington at any time during his 35 years of life. They suspected that a relationship may have contained him. They found out that Timothy had met his future wife in 1986 or early 1987. They married in 1993 and had a child. They believe that is the reason he wasn't active. In 2000, he became involved with drug use, and that is what ended his marriage. I do have to say, when looking at these sketches compared to the booking photos, this guy is a chameleon or it's two different guys. In the description for Denny, they said the guy had light hair and light eyes, but in the description for Kimberly, they said he had black beard and mustache. Did he dye his hair and get colored contacts for this 1987 booking photo? His nose and shape of his face is the same in all three photos. The 1987 photo is more of a match to the 2001 sketch. I wouldn't believe this was the same man if blood and DNA hadn't tied him to both of the victims. Or maybe the paper got it wrong and the guy in the colored photo is not Timothy Burkhart. Before I move on to the victims, I do have to take a bit of a detour. Two of the victims in this story are linked to other murder victims that are not part of this story. As I said, Kimberly Payne was one of 8 children. 2 of her siblings were also murdered. In 1993, one of her brothers, Daniel Payne, was found shot to death in an alley behind some houses in this Tacoma neighborhood. His body was found about 18 hours after neighbors heard shots ring out around midnight, but since no one knew exactly where the shots came from, no one called the police. The car he was found in was an Audi that didn't belong to him, and he was still sitting behind the steering wheel. This was never mentioned again in any of the papers. I am not sure if anyone was arrested or if it is still unsolved. Another of Kimberly's brothers, James Payne, was murdered on January 31st, 2015, by a man renting space at one of the outbuildings behind this house. James Payne was said to be renting an unattached garage, but other reports said it was a shed. There are 2 sheds on this property, a small one and another one that runs alongside the unattached garage and the small shed. A man, Richard Blair, who was either renting a shed or sharing the same space as James, beat James with a hammer and used a screwdriver to stab him to death. In August 2016, James' sister Lisa said at the sentencing this was her 3rd sibling she had lost to murder, and mentioned Kimberly, and those details were recounted, then mentioned Daniel, but again, no additional details regarding his murder. There was another brother, Mark, who died in 2017, but his death was not caused by murder. Rebecca Nash is the next victim in this story who is tied to other murder victims. In 2011, her high school was planning a 40-year class reunion. An article ran in the paper saying 7 classmates out of 80 who graduated in 1971 have been slain. Let me repeat that, slain. When I read that, I was thinking, yikes, 7 out of 80? That's a lot. I don't live on the West Coast, but I was thinking, damn, in my class of over 500, not one has been murdered, and I am creeping up on my 40th year since graduation. I started looking at the names on this list. And either the paper made a mistake or the classmate who was organizing it did, but ultimately it is the paper's fault for publishing something without checking for accuracy. I know, there are always retractions. However, in this case, within 2 days, a woman who was on the list was actually very much alive. Oopsie. So that left 6 people on the list, with words like homicide, murder, and slain used to describe their deaths. I dug a little deeper, and 4 out of the 7 were actually murdered. That is still a lot for a class that size. Guess what? There was no retractions for the other 2 people listed as murder, but weren't. Out of the 3 that were not murdered, we know one was alive, the other 2 were dead, but one was self inflicted, and the other on the list died in 2004, not 2007, and no one by that name was murdered. The man by that name was in the papers twice, once in 2004 for his obituary, and an honorary mention in 2007 for his service in the military. Of the 4 that were murdered, one was obviously Rebecca Nash. Another was Linda Marino. I will tell her story in another video. The remaining 2 were Mike McMahon. He was murdered during a robbery after leaving a Dallas, Texas nightclub, and Michael Davis was murdered in a drug-related crime. As far as the victims in this story, here is what I know about them. Denise Sallee was born August 22, 1968. She was described as smart and generally responsible. Her mother said from a very early age she loved to sing, and in school her favorite activities were music and choir. She loved poetry and the outdoors. Kimberly Payne was born June 4, 1970. She was the second youngest of 8 children. She was independent and very social. She enjoyed hanging out with friends, drawing, and painting. Kathryn Coates was born June 27, 1928. She was a loving wife, mother, and grandmother who lived a faith-based life dedicated to her church and religion. Rebecca Nash was born May 21, 1953. She was a mother, grandmother, and a volunteer to many community organizations. She was described as friendly but cautious. She was an avid sports fan who liked to bowl and shoot pool. She also enjoyed reading and traveling. I hope they are all resting in peace. Thank you for listening, and I will catch you on the next video.